Welcome, I'm Terry Christensen and this is Valley Politics. Today we'll talk with San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo about the city's current budget situation, his response to the recent devastating flood, and more. Later we'll hear from some residents on their views about priorities for the city, and then Cayce Hill will brief us on the work of Veggielution. We'll close our show talking about the early days of Silicon Valley with Ted Smith, the former CEO of the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition. In the 1970s, locals happily welcomed what we thought was clean, high-tech industry to the valley. But we were in for a rude awakening when toxic chemicals used in tech manufacturing affected workers and our underground water table. Ted and the Toxics Coalition led the fight for local, state, and national regulations on the industry. All this next on Valley Politics. Welcome everyone, and welcome Mayor Sam Liccardo.
Thanks, Terry. It's always a pleasure.
Your third visit to our show. Thank you.
I look forward to coming back.
Well, good. So 2016 was a good year for you in the city. The voters passed a sales tax, an increase in the business tax, and a couple of countywide measures that will help us out with housing and transportation. So how does our budget look today? Is our long fiscal nightmare over?
Well, the good news is, with the support of the voters, we managed to pass a package of pension reforms that will save a lot of money, including $42 million this year, about $3 billion over several decades. And with some additional revenues, I think the business community came forward and worked with us on reforming the business license fees and other things. That all helps. The bad news is we still have long-term chronic challenges. First and foremost, we've just got these enormous unfunded maintenance problems we've had just with our basic infrastructure, streets, roads, parks. That totals more than $1 billion. These are basic repairs that we've neglected for more than a decade, and that is catching up. And so we've got a big challenge in catching up to all that. We also have a challenge, as I think every city does, around retirement benefits. The good news is, the problem is no longer that we're granting new benefits that we can't afford. The problem now, at least for San Jose, is although we've reformed many of the issues, we're not getting returns out of our pension funds that we would need to be able to.
Not getting sufficient returns.
Exactly. Yeah, and even in good times, as we've had over the last couple of years, we've seen very, very low returns. And so that means everybody's got to pay more. And so we've got to deal with that challenge before it gets too big.
So the pension challenge continues.
It will, and it'll continue in San Jose, and it'll continue in any city in California.
And other states problem as well. Yeah. Well, one of the big maintenance issues is actually parks maintenance and developing new parks. Do you think it's time for a parcel tax for parks, or maybe a bond?
We've been talking about a parks bond for some time, looking at 2018 as a likely date, November. It's uncertain right now because there are other priorities too that we're considering as well. And if you do the bond option, really can only be used for capital purposes. So that means you can't just pay for maintenance people to be out there trimming, cleaning up, et cetera. It's really just for capital replacement, meaning you're actually replacing park equipment, for example, rather than just maintaining it. So when you're thinking about these measures, you have to make sure that the tool that you're hoping to use is actually going to be the one that you need to fix the problem. And so we're working on, I think, the next few months in conversation with the community, particularly around the green print, which is an opportunity for us to really engage a lot of neighbors around what they want to see in their communities. This will give us a good indication whether a park bond is the best approach.
Well, the voters have been incredibly generous the last few years, and they do like parks, so
they do.
There may be an opportunity.
Absolutely, and we'll certainly learn more in the months ahead. The good news is, because of the support of the voters, we've been able to restore staffing in some critical areas. Emergency medical response has been a huge challenge for us over several years, not meeting our response times. That's now changing now that we've restored all the browned out fire stations and we've got crews back up and running. We're seeing, just graduated the largest police academy we've seen in 4 years. What I'm hearing now is about the June Academy. This is going to be quite a bit larger. So we're really rebuilding the police department. And we're going to be able to pave more than 250 miles of roads this year, also critical. So all those things are heading in the right direction.
Well, that's some good news about hiring, but I understand you've got hundreds, maybe 800 open positions
Yes.
at City Hall. It seems to me there are various explanations for why they're open. Some people say the bottleneck is in human resources at City Hall. Some people say there's still low morale among city employees, so it's not an attractive place to work. Some people say the pay is not competitive in Silicon Valley. And I suspect millennials don't want to commit to long-term public service careers. So there are multiple problems. What do you see as the problem, and what are you doing to fix it? How are you going to get those positions
I think
filled?
it's some combination of various explanations. There is a challenge in HR, and we're working hard to fix that. And part of the challenge is with everything in City Hall. They're probably not staffed well enough in HR to be able to fix it as well as we'd like. And so certainly there's a management issue that we're working on. It is also true, I'm sure, that our pay is not competitive with Google and Facebook and all the other employers out there that are gobbling up talented people. On the other hand, I don't think it's true that young people are not interested in public service, because I'm seeing an enormous amount of enthusiasm, particularly among our newer employees, about the opportunities to serve. And it's something that is inspiring for me every time I see young planners or young police officers out there working to find a better way to do things. And I also don't believe that it's simply a morale issue. I am hearing very positive things about morale in a lot of places. It doesn't mean we don't have our challenges, and we've got plenty more to work on. But I think a lot of things are heading the right direction in the city. The challenge is we just happen to employ people in the most expensive market, or one of the two most expensive markets in the country.
Well, Sam, you've been very outspoken in your support for undocumented immigrants in our community. The city has a big welcoming policy. We have an Office of Immigration Services. But Donald Trump is not so enthusiastic. And you've also said the police aren't going to enforce federal immigration law. But President Trump and his Attorney General have said they may cut off funds to cities that they call sanctuary cities that don't cooperate. Aren't you worried about that?
Not terribly. We've actually seen the Attorney General back up now over the last several days, which is encouraging news that we're all reading the same Constitution. And certainly the decisions that Supreme Court has come out over the 10th Amendment, and recently including the county case that has been heard at the district court level, are pretty clear that federal government cannot essentially use federal dollars in unrelated subject areas to leverage local governments to comply with some particular provision in an unrelated area. So the area in which federal funds could be withheld is pretty narrow. It really relates to the Office of Justice programs and the Justice Department. At most, it would amount to a few $100,000 to our city budget, which is a budget of about $3.2 billion. So it's not terribly impactful. Now, it could be very impactful to the county of Santa Clara or the city or county of San Francisco. We tend to be pretty independent of the federal government. We don't rely much on federal dollars. I should also add, though, that we don't believe we're violating federal law. And what federal law says is essentially under Title VIII that we cannot direct our employees to refuse to comply or cooperate with federal law enforcement authorities. And we don't direct our employees to do that, but we simply choose as a matter of policy, and our police chiefs have been saying this now for 3 decades, we're not interested in federal immigration enforcement. They're also not interested in federal securities enforcement or federal environmental law enforcement. There's a lot of areas we don't enforce because that's the federal government's job. We've got a lot of crime to have to focus on that's independent of all those areas, and we need to focus our resources the time of our employees in those areas that are most impactful.
What's your response to people who say the city shouldn't be spending taxpayer money on any services to undocumented immigrants and residents?
Well, that I think presumes that undocumented residents aren't paying taxes, which is just false. They're paying sales taxes, we know.
Yeah.
They're paying rent. Rent is paying for utility taxes. There's a lot of taxes that are being paid every day by people in this city and in this country who are ultimately not going to get the benefit, for example, of Social Security, even though they're paying often into Social Security funds. Economist after economist has been pretty clear about the extraordinary positive economic impact that immigrants have, and particularly at a time like this when, frankly, we need to expand our labor pool to be able to support our growing economy. I think most economists would say this would be a terribly bad idea for us to say, well, we're going to stop spending money in an area to support people who ultimately are supporting all of us.
A lot of immigrants were victims in the latest flood on Coyote Creek, and the city's been criticized, and the water district's been criticized, and the city and the water district have criticized one another about inadequate warnings to residents. So I don't want to relitigate any of that, and I'm sure you don't either, but what's going to be different next time? What's being done to fix the problem?
Well, I'll relitigate part of it at least. I know you don't want to go there, but I've been very clear that the city was responsible for failing to notify residents, and it's something we need to fix. And the good news is I think we've come out now with new protocols about how we're warning people and when we're warning people that will ensure that we don't see a repeat of what we saw in February. And we've been working with the Water District to ensure that our warning system is something that makes sense in the larger scheme of how we get information about floods. Now, that information in terms of when we're getting the best information about flood risk is something we still need to work on, and that hasn't been fixed yet. But what we've certainly learned is, you can't rely on simply digital means of communication, particularly when we know so many thousands of our residents are still on the wrong side of the digital divide. And there's no substitute for knocking on doors. And so we learned that lesson the hard way, and we're fixing that going forward.
Well, it's certainly a tribute to you and your staff and city employees generally that you all were out there immediately helping in the neighborhood. So
yeah, an incredible effort from thousands of city employees who I saw out there on Saturdays.
And thousands of volunteers too. Yes, it was amazing.
More than 4,000 volunteers came out. The very first weekend, Paul Pereira, who's, as you know, is the hardest working human being on the planet, was sending out messages to get some volunteers to show up on Saturday for a cleanup out in Brookwood Terrace area. And we expected maybe 100 people would respond that Saturday.
Yeah.
We had 1,200 people that first day, and 4,000 over the next couple of weeks. It's really been incredible how the community's come together.
That's at least one great thing that came out of all this.
Yeah.
So how's it going with the city council? After the 2016 election, you had a different city council, 4 new members. It's a lot more liberal and labor friendly. They've actually beaten you on a couple of votes lately. And then on the other side, we have 3 Republican members of the council. That's the most Republicans since, I don't know, the 1960s.
Yes.
Probably. So how's it going? Do you have a working majority on the council?
Well, it depends on the issue, really. And, for a couple of years, I think it's fair to say we had a good run. And I think there was a strong consensus on a lot of issues that had been challenging in the past. Pension reform, for example, and transportation measures that we all roundly supported, and efforts to increase city revenues, for example, the business tax, all kinds of issues that typically would be pretty divisive that I think we had overwhelming majorities or unanimity on. And I think now, 5 budget votes we've seen have been unanimous. That's all wonderful, but we know we can't expect that to go on forever. In a big city, there's going to be division, there's going to be conflict and dissent, and that's fine. That's the way cities work. And I'm not going to win them all, and that's okay. I think the important thing, on the core issues, the initiatives I've been driving to really improve the quality of life in this city, the council still seems to be pretty strongly supportive, and I expect we're going to have disagreements on plenty of others.
We just have a few seconds left, so let me give you an opportunity to tell us what your top priority for the coming year is.
We are rebuilding our police department, and we are going to improve public safety in our city.
I think a lot of people would be pleased by that.
Yes.
Sam Liccardo, thank you very much.
Thanks, Terry. Always a pleasure.
Now let's hear what some San Jose residents say the city's priorities should be. Then Cayce Hill will brief us on the work of Veggielution.
The whole country is so dependent on California right now for good policies, and especially environment after yesterday. So I would hope, and it seems the case, that good environmental policy is considered here as good economic policies.
A lot of people here that are really sleeping on the streets daily, digging through trash, and there's a lot of condos being built, a lot of housing, and I think that there's a lot of money here and they should be helping the homeless people.
I definitely think road maintenance, but I also think like dealing with homeless encampments is kind of important. It's kind of like giving them like a place to be. I definitely think we should address the police force because we've had to there's been like a lot of reduction.
I think this mayor has a good balance of the priorities actually, and I think he was one of the first ones to recognize that we have to put money into our workers, including the police officers. And so he, I think, has been successful trying to get some of them back.
Hello, my name is Cayce Hill and I'm the Executive Director of Veggielution. At Veggielution, we believe in the power of food to connect, celebrate, and ultimately transform our communities. Our community farm grows over 30,000 pounds of local produce in East San Jose at the City of San Jose's Emma Prush Farm Park. And we share that produce with the community through our youth education, community engagement, and professional development programs. If you've ever peered down over the edge of 680-101 interchange and seen 6 acres of urban farmland, then you've seen Veggielution. But we want you to visit us up close. So on Saturday, July 1st, come out and visit us for the first Saturday at the farm from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Ever thought your morning yoga practice could be better with a few roosters crowing and the hum of a farm tractor in the background? Or perhaps you've wanted to try your hand at a new farm fresh recipe. Then first Saturdays are for you. From yoga and youth garden activities to Spanish language cooking classes and art in the garden, local community members are making new and lasting connections through shared meals, conversations, and new food experiences. Already have plans for July 1st? No worries. We'll be waiting for you on August 5th, September 2nd, and every other first Saturday after that. Also, keep an eye out for our community harvest event coming up in October. We can't wait to show you what's growing in East San Jose. Please visit us at www.veggielution.org or give us a call at 408-753-6705. And from the entire Veggielution crew, roots down, grow strong.
Next, on Where Are They Now, we talk with Ted Smith, an environmental hero here in the Valley and beyond. Ted will tell us about a time when industrial toxics threatened the health and well-being of the Valley and how the community responded. Ted Smith, founder of the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start by hearing how you got to the Valley in the first place.
I moved to California in 1969. I came out here from Washington, D.C., where I'd been a VISTA volunteer, and I went to law school up at Stanford. And I moved to San Jose then in 1972 following law school.
You started your law practice here in the 70s then.
Yeah.
This is when we started to identify as Silicon Valley. People started to call it Silicon Valley. By 1980, there were 3,000 or so high-tech firms or electronics firms. It was not as high a tech as we know now. And in the late 70s, we started to realize some things about Silicon Valley that I want to read you a quote from Janet Gray Hayes. You'll be familiar with it.
Right.
So she was mayor of San Jose, as you know. And she famously said, "I remember being so happy that we were having clean industry come to our community. I remember thinking about the smokestacks at other industries around the country. I didn't expect this problem to erupt in our own community." So tell us what happened. When did you first become aware of what was going on?
Let me just say that somebody took that statement and said what they didn't realize is that they buried the smokestacks.
Oh,
What they did is they put
it was happening
they
underground.
put the chemicals underground.
Yeah.
It was actually my wife, Mandy Hawes, who was involved with an early initiative called the Santa Clara Center for Occupational
Mandy's
Safety and
also
Health.
an attorney.
Yeah. And they started doing research on the so-called clean industry and discovered it was a chemical handling industry. And they actually were able to uncover a lot of that in the 70s. And they actually were able to identify through a hotline that they had for electronics workers that there were serious problems going on, serious health problems.
I guess what people may not be aware of is electronics workers then were actually doing manufacturing. They were assembling things. It wasn't software or in the cloud.
No, the reason we were called Silicon Valley was because the silicon chip industry was here, plus all the other kinds of manufacturing that went along with that. And so there were thousands and thousands of people, mostly young women, who were involved in the manufacturing of the electronic components. So anyway, they discovered that this was a serious problem, but and they even got some publicity in the San Jose Mercury News about these issues. But it wasn't until the chemicals actually got out of the tanks and into the drinking water supply that people began to pay attention.
So it was affecting the workers early on. They were dealing with it
That's right.
up close.
And as long as people could kind of separate that out and say, oh, I'm sorry for the workers, but it's not me. Once it was in the drinking water, all of a sudden it was, oh my God, that could be me. Now it's serious. And so that was the most important change in the dynamic of anything that had happened up until that point.
And how did you connect to all that?
I was still a lawyer at the time, trying to change the world by filing lawsuits and feeling that I was not working so well. And once the chemicals were found in the water, I realized that this was an opportunity to try to bring people together, to organize, to try to get some legislative solutions. And so we realized that in order to do that, we had to have a coalition of people, because we knew that by that time already the electronics industry was a very powerful interest. And so we put together the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition and got involved in a process which ended up as the Hazardous Materials Model Ordinance. And in 1983, that ordinance was passed throughout the whole valley. And one of the key provisions in it was the first right-to-know provision of any ordinance in the country. And what it said was that companies that were storing chemicals on site had to disclose that to the local fire departments, and that was public information. So all of a sudden, it was now going to be public information about which chemicals were being stored where and in what volumes. And that was a revolutionary breakthrough at the time, and that then became local law and then state law and eventually federal law.
We'll come back to that. I just want to take us back. So the leaks probably were starting to happen in 1978, 79.
Late 70s,
80.
early 80s.
People began to become aware of them in 1980, 81 or so.
81, I think, was the first time. The Regional Water Board got wind of this. They started asking the companies to start testing, because if it's underground, you can't see it. You don't know it's there. But once they made them start drilling wells and testing the groundwater, it turned out that virtually all the who's who in the high-tech industry had the same kind of problems.
And the coalition, the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition, was formed in 1982.
Yes.
Announced in 1982. You were, I think your title was chair or co-chair.
Something like that.
At the time. Eventually you're executive director of the coalition. What's that mean, coalition? Who was in the coalition? What was it made up of?
Well, we tried to go as broad as we could, and so we started with the firefighters, who were really good allies, and they were the ones who were always on the front line. The labor unions, I'd worked closely with labor unions at the time. The local environmental groups, the Sierra Club.
Labor unions were just getting liberal around here at about that time.
It had been a
pretty
big
conservative
change
before.
Yes,
right?
that's right. There was a big change. Peter Cervantes Gauci was the
Yeah.
head of the Labor Council, and he became the president of our board. So it was a labor, environmental, but then also neighborhood groups. We had a number of neighborhood groups involved, and then public health was the other pillar. So we knew that we needed breadth as well as depth, and that's how we put it together.
And elected officials were responsive to this?
Very, yeah. And of course the electeds were as surprised as anybody else.
Yeah.
See, the industry had sold itself not only as a clean industry, but as a light industry. And so they got preferential zoning treatment. So the Fairchild plant, which was the first of the kind of the most notorious of the spill sites, it was directly across the street from a residential neighborhood. And if the city zoning people had realized what they were allowing, they would never have done that. I mean, the reason why most high-tech development now is in industrial parks is to keep it away from residential neighborhoods. But in those days, they just mixed it all together. So when there was a leak, it got immediately into the drinking water supply.
So the coalition pushed for the model ordinance that you described a moment ago. What were the challenges to getting that approved? It had to apply, I should just say, it had to apply to multiple entities, right? There are 15 cities in the valley, there's the county, there's unincorporated areas.
And because of the way we're set up here, you couldn't just pass one ordinance at the county level for everybody. Each city has its own jurisdiction. So you had to pass it at every single city. And everybody realized we had to do the same thing in every city so it wouldn't set up a competition between the cities. Everybody was afraid that somebody, and some people pointed at the city of Santa Clara, saying, oh, they're going to lowball everything. And if they lowball it, then they'll get all the new industry going there and we'll lose out. So they were very aware of that. So there was a lot of effort spent in developing this, and it wasn't just a right to know ordinance, it was a storage ordinance, so that it required double containment of all tanks, and it required strict monitoring between the tanks. So there's a lot of retrofitting that had to go on, so it was going to cost money. But the industry, I think, was so shocked and frankly so embarrassed by what had happened that they realized that they had to do something dramatic in order to try to make up for what had happened.
So the Santa Clara Valley Manufacturing Group, founded by David Packard a few years before this, cooperated?
They were pretty cooperative, and some of the key companies, I remember Intel was very much involved in it, Hewlett Packard was very much involved in it, and there were technical issues that we had to debate. You know, what list of chemicals are we going to use? What are the volumes that we're talking about? We can't be talking about a thimble, that kind of thing. But once it was decided that we needed to have a comprehensive ordinance that would apply to everybody, and we set the goals of what we wanted to accomplish, the rest of it was pretty businesslike. There was also, Joan Gallo was the city attorney in San Jose working on this, and she was really, really helpful. I mean, there were some really incredible people involved in that, because I think everybody knew at the time, we've got to do this, we've got to do it right, and we can't mess it up.
So the county, the regional model ordinance becomes the state law, essentially, and a couple of years later, federal law. So this county really led, and the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition really led the country on this.
Byron Scher was the guy who took it up.
Yeah.
At the time, he was an assemblyman, and he took it to the California legislature. But it was a classic example, as a professor of political science knows. You start locally, and then you build it up. It's the bottom up. That's a perfect example of how you do policy. It happens rarely, in my opinion, but that one actually worked.
And grassroots. It actually came from the people and from the community.
Right.
Ted, we're almost out of time, but I got to ask you, because I know you retired as executive director of the Toxics Coalition, but you didn't retire from your activism. So what have you been doing since retirement?
Well, we've been working with people in other parts of the U.S. who have been experiencing high-tech development with showing lessons learned, but mostly I've been working internationally now. The high-tech industry, as you know, has moved out. We don't have manufacturing right now. It's in Asia and Latin America. So I spend a lot of time working with groups there saying, here's what we learned, here's what you need to know so that you can protect your own communities.
Are you getting traction there on these issues?
There's a lot of activity going on. Yeah, tremendous amount of young activists. It feels good to see, you know, what things were like here 30 and 40 years ago being reproduced now in many parts of the world.
So you're still an unsung hero. The Dalai Lama recognized you as such.
He did.
He did. That must have been wonderful.
It was very nice, yeah.
Thanks for your conversation today, Ted.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll be back next month with a one-hour special looking back on some very big political events in 1979 and 1980. Meanwhile, you can catch up on previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org or on YouTube by searching for CreaTV San Jose. And you can let us know what you think about our show and suggest future topics or guests by email at valleypolitics@creatvsj.org, on Twitter at valley_politics, and by following us on Facebook. And now that's all, folks. Thanks for watching Valley Politics today. See you next time.